It's time for the smackdown to decide whose philosophy will dominate now that humorism has given up its heavyweight causation crown. The heavyweight champ of etiology will be decided by two opposing ideas with two contrasting views of the causes of madness. In the blue corner, René Descartes packing the punches with his famous Cartesian dualism. And in the red corner, John Locke, who won't have a bar of it, will be bobbing and weaving with his associationist psychology. Now, Descartes was incredibly important in a number of areas, both scientific and philosophical. He was a deeply influential thinker whose ideas spread across Europe. He was also best known for developing a theory that demonstrated that we could have certain knowledge of at least ourselves and therefore absolute knowledge to some degree of the world. But this is not the issue that we're interested in here. All we are interested in here is the division between the mechanical body and the animated soul. For what Descartes did was he reimagined the body as if it was some form of automaton. It could be explained in terms of mechanics. And here we can see the kind of diagrams that illustrate the similarities between man and machine. But a human being was more than a machine. A human being contained the mind, the soul, in fact. And it was the soul that animated the body and controlled the body. So within this perception, we can see a different form of madness. Remember, before the break occurred between the higher and lower functions in the brain. In dualist perception, the break is going to occur somewhere else. Now, our thing in the world is observed through sensory inputs, through the body machine. In this instance, the eye. The eye picks up light from the giraffe and it processes the light and it sends the image to the brain and tells it that it is a giraffe. When the body machine is functioning well, the mind, the soul, functions equally as well. What, however, if the body machine goes wrong? Again, the image comes into the eye, it goes all squirrely, and the next thing you know, we're in the realms of delusion. The thought thing is the wrong thing. Now, the breakage has not gone on at the lower regions of the mind, in the areas of fantasy and imagination. Rather, it has gone on at the level of sensory input into the body. And for many people, this remained the dominant perception of how madness occurred during this period. And of course, the body machine could go wrong through humoral imbalance or later on through problems with the nerves. But they're all problems of the senses. And of course, if the body machine goes wrong, then the best way to try and put things right is to put the body machine right. And if you can put the body machine right, then you can go some way to actually setting the mind to rights. So to summarize, in this model, madness is the failure to process thought properly. It is a break between observed things and thought things. It occurs in the body machine, but it leaves the soul, which Descartes believed was lodged within the pineal gland, intact. And it is the position that is supported by some of the greatest physicians of the day, including Hermann Boerhaave, who we will return to towards the end of this lecture. But the ideas expressed so fully by Descartes were soon to break down under the ferocious gaze of Locke's empiricism. John Locke is one of the most famous and celebrated of British Enlightenment philosophers, known for his key work, an essay concerning human understanding. If I were to identify a key Lockean point, it would be the idea that at birth the mind was a blank slate, the tabula rasa, and education and culture and society were inscribed upon the mind and forged the individual into a certain kind of character. Now, Locke himself didn't deny that there was a soul, but he put it in the background It's almost as if it's something that emerges through the process of socialization and culturation. And we can see that this is a fundamentally different way of understanding the body, particularly when we look at the weight that Locke placed upon the senses. We could only know things through our senses. We could only process them in our brain through our senses. Everything was sense experience and sense impressions. Critical to understanding how the Lockean perspective changed the language and theory of psychology, it is important that we look at the Molyneux problem, which was a very, very interesting thought experiment. William Molyneux was himself a philosopher and scientist, and he communicated quite regularly with Locke. He sent a letter to Locke in the late 1680s, and in this letter he posed the following problem. A man being born blind and having a globe and a cube, nigh of the same bigness, committed into his hands, and being taught or told which is called the globe and which the cube, so as easily to distinguish them by his touch or feeling, then both being taken from him and laid on a table, let us suppose his sight restored to him. Whether he could by his sight, and before he touched them, know which is the globe and which the cube, or whether he could know by his sight, before he stretched out his hand, whether he could not reach them, though they were removed 200 or 1,000 feet from him. So basically translated, what this means is, if you're born blind, you can learn to feel and identify the shape of a cube or a globe, a sphere. However, if your sight is restored to you, and you weren't able to touch those objects, would you be able to recognize them as the globe or sphere? Now, Locke, when Molyneux originally sent the problem to him, ignored it, but Molyneux prompted him again a couple of times, and then Locke thought about it and thought, this is deeply, deeply interesting, because it gives us a way of trying to judge the relative weights of the senses. That's how impressions are received into the body, and what we do with those senses with our judgment or our reason. And Locke thought about this for a long time, and I don't know what your answer would be, have a think about it, but Locke thought about it for a long time and decided that the answer was no. It basically meant that your senses could be functioning fine, but your judgment was wrong. It was a great thought experiment, and the idea spread across Europe, particularly to France, where a group of materialist thinkers were trying to reconfigure our sense of the world and locate it in natural laws of explanation. Lockean empiricism was deeply attractive to these individuals like Voltaire. Now, it just so happened that the thought experiment that Molyneux put forward became real. William Cheselden, one of the great surgeons and anatomists of the early 18th century, believed that he could cure through surgery cataracts, and he carried out the first operation on a 13-year-old boy during the 1720s. This is how he described the boy's perception once he could see again after the operation. When he first saw, he was so far from making any judgment of distances that he thought all objects, whatever touched his eyes, as he expressed it, as what he felt did his skin, and thought no object so agreeable as those which were smooth and regular, though he could form no judgment of their shape, or guess what it was in any object that was pleasing to him. So he was almost feeling a sense of touch in his eyes, and the objects that were being placed in front of him, he couldn't recognise them. Cheselden continues, he knew not the shape of anything, nor any one thing from another, however different in shape or magnitude, but upon being told what things were, whose form he knew before from feeling, he would carefully observe that he might know them again. In other words, the patient of Cheselden's sensations were functioning perfectly well, but because there was not a proper association going on between perception and the senses, he was unable to name the things that he could see. But this didn't mean that his judgment was wrong. On the contrary, as soon as he was told what an object was, he could relearn the association and everything would be sorted out. On the face of it, it appeared that Cheselden had been able to solve the Molyneux problem. And there were certainly many individuals on the continent In France and the Low Countries like Voltaire, Quimper and Condillac, great materialist radicals who really felt that the thought experiment had become real and that we could answer the Molyneux problem with a high degree of certainty. Now, there were others that were more sceptical, and it's interesting the shape that their skepticism took. The individuals who were particularly associated with criticisms of Cheselden's experiment were Lemaitre and Diderot, both of them materialist radical thinkers. And they believed, for example, that the experimental design was not particularly good, that the results were ambiguous, that the boy might have been able to see more than Cheselden let on. After all, cataracts are not complete blindness. However, what they were looking for was a better experimental design so the Molyneux problem could be tested better. What they wanted was a categorical no answer. The extent to which the Molyneux problem and developed a new psychological language that would feed into moral therapy can be seen in this imagined conversation between Boerhaave and the madman. This was Voltaire who set up this dialogue between Boerhaave, who we've already seen was a follower of the Cartesian school of thinking about madness, the soul and the sensations. He had Boerhaave say, "Your soul is as spiritual, as pure, as immortal as ours, but our souls are well housed and yours badly. The window of the house are blocked up. It lacks air. It suffocates." To which the madman replied, "My windows are as open as yours, since I see the same objects and hear the same words. It must therefore follow that my soul makes bad use of my senses, or that my soul is itself only a vitiated sense, a depraved quality." Now don't be deceived by the word soul here. What Voltaire means by soul is judgment and reason. He does not believe in the immortal soul. He's just using it as shorthand. So the implication of the Molyneux problem and the way that it feeds into what will become moral therapy at the end of the 18th century are these. The inability to judge correctly does not necessarily mean that the sensations are wrong. It is a matter of false association. It is a problem that occurs in the mind and not the body, and doesn't even have to involve insanity, as in the case of Cheselden's patient. It opens the door to delusion as a major category of madness, almost like false association, run crazy, and it shifts away the perspective of people working in the nascent mind sciences from thinking about madness as a problem of the body and recognizing it as a problem of the mind. There would only be one winner. Locke's associationism would take the crown. In Descartes' case, it was, in some regards, merely new philosophical wine in a dirty old bottle. The place where madness commenced merely shifted from an imbalance of the humours to the malfunctioning of the body machine. Cartesianism failed to open up a new space for understanding and treating minds and madness, leaving the mad person little better than a wild beast, while sustaining a treatment regime that was focused upon restraint and the often violent retuning of that body machine rather than the soothing of souls. It would take the associationism of Locke to radically alter attitudes to minds and madness and open up a space where moral therapy could exist. Now, Locke may have been the winner, but it wasn't a knockout. It was merely a victory on points. As we'll see, Cartesianism never hit the canvas and punched until the very end.